it did take me a long time, I think, to get the idea of what is the importance of classical education and what is my role as a classical teacher. And it took me, I think, a couple years to really get that under my belt. But it was a lot easier to do because of the curriculum that was just set out in front of me.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm seated with Martin, Tanya, and a very special guest, Mrs. Emily Saxon.
Thank you.
And obviously, we talk a lot about truth and goodness on this podcast, so we thought we'd turn our attention to beauty. We brought the best guest possible.
Oh my, he's really hoping
he's
for
been
a
planning
good...
that for weeks.
That's
so
right.
Now we can let the roast begin.
That's right. That's right. Because Emily is Shane's wife.
Yes.
Which you did not say.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
Yeah, you didn't say
Good
Mrs.
preface.
Shane Saxon is.
No,
Oh, please, no.
So the actual topic is going to be the one thing that the three of you share in common, and that is your unconditional love for me. Just kidding.
Oh,
It is
right.
that you all are classical educators who are not formally classically educated yourselves.
That is correct.
And even more than that, you all taught Latin, and none of you formally studied Latin.
And that's right.
We do things we don't know about. That's what we do.
No, that's not true. But we're going to get into that and the advantages of that, the disadvantages. But before we do, Martin, what have you been reading recently?
Oh, gosh. I was just listening to some new thing yesterday, and I can't remember what it was. But that, I'm still stuck on Three Musketeers. I've still
You
gotten
haven't
to Three
finished
Mus-
it?
No,
Stuff when you don't
I
have any
haven't.
reading momentum.
It's just so. There's so many things going on.
You
and
need to finish it.
I know.
You just need to finish
I'm
it.
closing in on it.
Okay.
You
But
always
I'm-
have an audiobook going, though, don't you?
I
Yes,
have
but
like
he can't
5
remember what it
audiobooks
is.
going.
So have you read Three Musketeers?
No.
It's time to read it.
Yeah.
No, not after Martin's stellar review.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to finish it because I wanted to read it because it's just one of those classic books that,
It is. It's like the beginning of the swashbuckle tale.
and I loved. I'm blanking on the name of
Count of Monte Cristo?
Count of Monte Cristo. I love
Mhm.
Count of Monte Cristo.
This is not the Count of Monte
It's
Cristo.
not the Count of Monte Cristo, but we've gone over this before in the show.
Yeah.
I'm still.
He doesn't know
working
what
on
he's
it.
reading, but he is reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm about 2/3 of the way through Spectator Bird by Wallace Stegner.
Oh, yes. I haven't read that. What do you think?
It's really good. And I came across this great quote anecdote yesterday that I like. I'm
not that
listening to it
great.
on audio.
It's not that great.
It is great, Emily. And it's so great that during a red light, I stopped to like write it down on my phone. But
Yes.
the main character is talking about how when someone's like sharing something deeply emotional with him and he doesn't know what to say, Wallace Stegner is the master of the simile. He says, it's like a man who owns a shop where he fixes cats and he's got clocks in the window. And someone asks him, why do you have clocks in the window? And he says, what would you put in the window?
And he proceeded to tell me that on our walk yesterday. And I told him that I thought it was kind of dumb and I didn't get it. And he's like, you do not have a correct level of humor.
I totally got it.
Thank you, Tanya.
Having cats who have been fixed, I totally get. What is he going to put in the window?
Yeah, good question. So, also, my friend
I
Mitchell,
like it.
he bought me a book in the popular patristic series
Good gracious.
and it's St. Gregory's Rule. And so I'm
Okay.
taking a little brief pause from City of God to read that, and then I'm going to go back to City of God. So, what about you, Tanya? What are you reading?
I'm reading the newest book by Anne Cleves, which I love Anne Cleves. Have you read Anne Cleves?
You've told me about her.
I love her. Have you watched Shetland or Vera on BritBox?
No.
That's her books.
Okay.
Those are her books. Yes. You should watch both of those.
Yeah,
I think you'd like
BritBox
them.
it's right up my alley.
Yes. Do you pay for BritBox?
We do not.
Well, you should.
Coming soon.
All right. We have League Pass.
I don't know what that is.
That's where I can watch all the NBA
Oh,
games.
football. It's football.
Well, basketball. But
Oh, sorry. It's a sport.
yeah. So Ann Cleves, that's it, huh?
And that is, well, I mean, I'm reading Carol's essays,
Yeah.
Carol Reynolds' essays. I'm reading Adam of the Road because that's
yeah.
what Lee and Dana and I are currently discussing. So, but as far as my own pleasure reading with my coffee in the morning, it's Ann Cleeves right now. I pre-ordered the book because I wanted it so badly, and they sent it to me in the mail, and now I am happily devouring it.
That's a great feeling.
Hey everybody, Shane here. Just saying thank you for the way you've supported our show and continue to do so through your likes, shares, and comments below. Viewer support makes this show work, and we're incredibly glad to have you along on this classical journey. Thank you for being here. And let's get back to the episode.
No,
Yes.
Tanya's been giving me flack because
Where's
I've been.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Can I talk to Emily just a second? When is Frederick Backman going to put something else
He just
out?
put out something new. You read it. We said we were going to talk about it.
The
we
Winners?
haven't yet.
Yeah, it's been forever. I feel like we need it's time for him.
I haven't heard of anything.
Okay. I'm
So,
sorry.
No, just to introduce Emily, you've given me flack for bragging about how much I read. Emily reads 2 to 3 times as much as I do. It's
That is-
embarrassing for me.
That is so false. It's the most false statement.
So what have you been reading, Emily? Tell me all 15 books you've read since last week.
First of all, you came on this podcast since I am a religious listener.
Thank you.
And you said something about reading 5 books, which I can attest to. That's perfectly honest. I've been in a huge reading rut recently. I read very little in comparison to him. So that's
sorry.
kind
Could
of
it be because you have a 1-year-old?
I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, but what are you reading right now?
I am reading in the vein of British murder mysteries. That's an Irish murder mystery, actually.
No.
Tana French's Broken Harbor.
I've never read her.
I love Tana
My
French.
kid, one of my
I'm
boys
gonna try
likes
her.
Tana French, and I've got several of her books.
I love
Oh,
her.
really? Have
So-
you tried one?
No, I haven't.
What do you like about Tana French?
So I do love like crime, suspense, thriller books for the most part, but she's so much better than the just your average like, buy it off the shelf kind of
James
thriller.
Patterson?
I do love James Patterson, but
I do. I'm not a fan.
but that kind of book though, right? Like a beach read. I just call them beach reads, right?
Right.
Hers are so much more thoughtful. She's incredibly patient with her storylines, and they're thick. Her books are pretty big. So I was reading it last night, and they had just brought in the suspect, and I'm thinking, great, this is the end of the book. And then I looked down on my Kindle. Hate me now. I looked down on my Kindle, and it was like 40% through. So
What's
she's
gonna happen,
she's
right?
got a lot more to go, and she goes really deep into characters, and you just really feel like there's a wrestle that these main characters always have, and she kind of touches on a different person every book. So it's all kind of the same murder squad, but it's a different person in the murder squad.
Oh, that's nice.
It's
So it's
very
not like
good.
one protagonist, it's like the whole group.
Yes, but they don't all like work together. So some of it is, in the very first book, she talked about this one particular detective, but then he no longer works for the force in her next book. And she talks about his partner. And then in the next book, it's some guy from the murder squad a while ago. So you don't have to read them in order, but it has been.
I
fun.
read everything in order.
No, Emily, not to start beef between you and someone else besides me on this podcast, but I've heard you at home occasionally critique someone else on this podcast for being derogatory against modern literature. Is that accurate?
Who could that be? Would it be the person that said he never reads anything that's less than 50 years old?
It could be. I'm not going to divulge my sources.
That's not true, though.
I just thought of
you have
two-
read recent books.
I just was going to mention,
So there is some-
reinsert myself in here because there are 2 books that were just been published that I'm reading.
Look at that.
You
See?
do say you don't read anything that's less than 50 years old. So how are
And
you
it is
justifying
true.
reading current literature?
Just because.
Because you just spout things out that have absolutely no basis
I
in
just want to
reality.
make a philosophical point.
Uh-huh.
So things like that.
Well, I'm here to counter your philosophical point.
Yeah, Emily reads a lot more
No,
modern.
I actually read a lot of fairly modern.
Yes, I know that.
So
So when you say it, I'm sitting here thinking, have I been transplanted to a different planet?
I'm just trying to keep you guessing.
I mean, I like both. I'm not a big fan of modern lit. I'm not, but I do have my British murder mystery authors, and you're right about the British murder mystery. There, it is different from the American murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen much more slowly. There's
And they
much
all
less
happen
action.
in the parlor.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and then nothing really happens.
It does actually.
They just literally talk to people for several hundred pages and then they solve it. There's not a lot of, there's no violence.
Nothing really happens.
Right. It's all very cerebral.
It is like the what's it called? There's a whole genre of murder mysteries that are, what are they called? Dark academia. Have you heard this term?
No.
So and I would say that Tana French is kind of sort of in that category where academia, meaning it kind of, is around students like a university, something like that. But then dark, obviously.
Because it's crime.
It's crime. It's not just crime. It's dark crime. Like you're getting into the minds of these people. And I would say that is much more her style. And that's much more my style. Donna Tartt, if you've ever heard of her,
I've heard of her, but I haven't read her.
She is also very much in that, I would say, in that vein.
Oh, wait. Did she write The Secret History?
Yes.
Okay, I have read
Dark
that.
Academia. I feel like that's a pretty solid title for that.
I think the philosophical point to be made here, to put a bow on this, is that we were made for stories. And so to say like only old stories are great or only new stories are great, like it is a little short-sighted. I think Martin's point, which is a sound one, is that there are really great stories in the past. And so if you only go to the modern, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. But there are also, we were made for stories. So they're great modern stories as well.
I was engaging in overstatement to make a point that most of us just read modern fiction. And I think that causes a lack of a balance in your reading, because you need to be able to see things the way people in other ages saw them in order to really understand human beings.
Well, I'm glad that we got this straightened out. Thank you for calling it out. We should let other people
you
on
all called it out for her, as I recall.
Oh, no,
she didn't. She just.
I didn't pick a fight with Martin.
That's true. Shane tried to pick the fight between you and Emily.
Let's turn to our topic at hand. So, classical education is, as we know it today, is relatively recent, because what we're trying to do is get back to the past. And so, in its very essence, to try to get back to the past, to try to restore the tradition, is a more recent enterprise. However, so the result of that is that a lot of people in classical education today were not classical educated. The three of you, for instance, are all classical educators that didn't have a formal classical education. Someone could say that is really challenging to become a classical teacher when you've not had a classical education yourself. What were your experiences, Martin, as you became a classical educator that made it possible to do it? And what were the advantages of not having had a classical education?
Well, when you say not having had a classical education, in one sense, that's not true, because I studied philosophy in college. So I think if you can do philosophy, because I think, people talk about the degradation of a lot of college education today, and I think that's true. But there are certain departments it's harder to corrupt. And, if you have to read, I said this before, if you have to read Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, then you have to either have come to it with a good education, or you have to get it while you
really work hard.
You have to work hard. It's very hard. It's very difficult. And so I think actually probably in taking the philosophy degree, that trained me to understand that you can set a challenge before you like that, and you can do it. You can succeed in it. And so I think I came to classical education having already kind of conquered something that was hard, and really doing some of the things that we did, teaching Latin when we didn't know it, teaching. Now, I had a background in philosophy, so the logic was not as hard. I had some background in that, but we studied modern logic, and my book was on traditional logic, which is quite different. So it was something different. But I think that I did have some preparation for doing hard things that I didn't know, learning hard things. And, I think back and I think, well, I went to one of the best high schools in California when California had good schools, but I still don't remember it being very challenging. But I did get a better education then than people get now. So I'll say that too. But I think one of the things, one of the qualities a teacher has to have is the ability and the interest in learning new things. That is really a necessary quality for a teacher. So it's not like it's outside the kinds of things that a teacher ought to be able to do. A teacher ought to be able to learn new things. All teachers need to do that. And I know there's some teachers that teach the same thing over and over and over and over again, but still you should be learning something more about that and incorporating that experience in your future teaching and all that. But yeah, I mean, we talked about this before. We would walk in in the morning to school, and Cheryl wouldn't have quite ready the chapter of first form or something, and it would be handed to us on the way in.
On the way in.
Yeah. And a good teacher should be able to do that, really. And that I don't want to scare people with that, because there's some people out there who probably think, well, I'm not a good teacher. I couldn't do that. But once you get the system down.
But we had already, I mean, I had sat in her Latin class for 2 years. So I had some prep.
Yeah.
And
I
you had taught Latin.
Henley
so,
Latin,
so it wasn't totally foreign to us, but it was brand new material.
But if you have a good program in front of you, you should be able to sit down the night before and go through the material and know how to teach it, even though you will be learning that day as you're teaching it for the first time.
Yes, and I think sometimes that what we've done is hampered that. She worked so hard to make sure that everything that we published was so teacher friendly that I think a lot of times teachers don't realize they still need to prep, that they still need to go through the material themselves. They still need to know more than they're teaching. So yeah, Cheryl gave me a curriculum to teach, but then she also gave me Durant, Caesar, and Christ. She just came in and said, I bought this for you, telling me you need to know more than you're teaching on a 5th or 6th grade level. Mm-hmm. And so I think some of what we've done may possibly handicap teachers that don't realize they still have a lot of work to do. We've made it as easy as possible, but it's not fair to your students not to actually do the work yourself.
Now, Emily, you're a similar generation to Tanya and Martin, but a little different generation.
A little different.
So what was your experience of
old soul generation, I suppose that's
like
it.
I could be her mother. Martin could be her father.
What was your experience? Because Martin's point being that he had a classical education in part before he was a classical teacher. Yours was a Christian school education, Christian university. What was your experience becoming a classical teacher?
It was very interesting. The year before I taught at HLS, I was teaching at another school here in Louisville and was just shocked by having had this education degree and being taught a very specific, this is how you should teach. And it was definitely how you should teach in a progressive classroom. And I was ready to just, incorporate technology into all of my lessons and ready to go. And I got into the classroom and there was nothing for me. They gave me the textbook and said...
This is at the former school?
At the former school, yeah. They gave me the textbook and said, here's your book. Now you need to, make lesson plans and you need to figure out how you're going to teach your kids. And they had very specific requirements as to what they wanted me to do each week, but nothing was done for me. And I just spent an immense amount of time that year prepping and planning and not knowing if I was doing the right thing. And the students were not prepared for the things I was doing, the assignments that I wanted to give them, writing a paragraph in answering a question or, filling out an outline or something like that. They weren't prepared for those things. So when I came into HLS and I was hired there and I was presented a box of curriculum that was cohesive and all they wanted me to do was that. They had it laid out for me. I knew exactly what was expected of me. And after attending teacher training, I knew exactly how I should be teaching this. And walking into the classroom was just such a different experience because I had something in front of me and it was already figured out. I wasn't handed the lesson, that morning. I was given the box of curriculum at the end of the school year and I had all summer to prepare. But it was just a unique experience because the things that we were teaching, the things that I was teaching, the students were prepared. They had come in from these other teachers with great classroom management, and it was just such a different experience. The things that I could require of them, writing a sentence, writing a paragraph at 6th grade, they could actually do them and we could have good conversation. And so it did take me a long time, I think, to get the idea of what is the importance of classical education and what is my role as a classical teacher. And it took me, I think, a couple years to really get that under my belt, but it was a lot easier to do because of the curriculum that was just set out in front of me.
Yeah, this is the thing. We're always reinventing the wheel in schools. It's like every teacher has to reinvent what and how they're supposed to teach. And it's like, we've been doing this for 2,500, 3,000 years, and we're still reinventing it in the days before we teach. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Let's go into Latin. Now, Emily, you're obviously smarter than the average person by a lot, but with Latin specifically, what people don't know is that you're not necessarily like a nerdy, intellectual. You like books and movies and a good time.
Yes.
So I think a lot of times when people think of like mastering Latin, they think, oh, you've got to be this like really bookish
like
person,
you,
like me, perhaps, to master an ancient language. You kind of stepped into Latin and make it look easy. What do you think helps you to actually do that? And do you have to have this particular kind of bookish bent to be good at teaching kids Latin?
No, I don't think you do. I do think you have to like your subject to a certain extent. That comes across to the students. And I just happened to love the Latin.
And what did you like about it, though?
Good question. I actually thought about that in my driving to work today. What am I going to say if he asks that question? I hadn't done anything like that before. My foreign language experience was Spanish for a really long time. In fact, embarrassingly long for what I know. And I just really liked the regularity of it. I felt like now as an adult, I get English grammar. And so that made Latin much more accessible. And so even though my students coming in, my first time teaching 3rd form, they knew more vocab than I did. I didn't know all of the vocabulary, but in fact, it didn't really matter because I understood the mechanics of the language because I get language and they did not. So that was mostly what I was explaining. And I think also I really liked the fact that it was just so regular, so consistent. And because of, again, the curriculum, the form series they're just really great. Coming in, I knew exactly what each lesson ought to look like. And so I didn't have to worry about extraneous things. I could just come in and teach the lesson the way that a 2nd form lesson is taught for the most part and the way a 1st form lesson is taught. And because I got the grammar, I'm just communicating that to the students and helping them to see the fun aspects of it.
I do think that's a major point is that when you're teaching a subject like Latin that you don't know, that any of us didn't know, and just learned on the job, I think that the important thing, and I tell parents this all the time, you don't have to memorize all the vocabulary. You just need to understand how a declension works, how a conjugation works. And it's so regular that at that point, once you have that basic understanding, you can teach it. But you do need to understand the basis of the language and how it fits together, like the foundation. And then,
and also its relevance to English, because on those lessons that I was handed and walking in the door and sitting down, I could look at that vocabulary and I could see 5 words right away that were clearly some root for a number of English words. And it's almost archaeological, that you've got this language here that was the basis for so much of English, and it's back there, and in that development from the older languages to the newer languages. Students kind of think that's cool, So you ask them, okay, so what words do you think might relate to that, and they come up with stuff. And that's interesting to them, that language is not just some language with different words for the same thing, for things that we already have words for. It's part of our linguistic history. And I don't think they have even thought of that before, that our language comes from somewhere. Where does it come from? Well, here's a big piece of it right here. And that's interesting to students.
I thought the most fun thing was having learned the curriculum, because it took me, I think, 2 years before I was teaching third form with my sixth graders. So I had 2 years of the sixth grade curriculum. And once I started teaching third form, making all of these connections to other subject matters. And there's one specific spelling lesson in sixth grade that has Latin roots as all of the words. And so we were able to talk about what are these Latin words that you know. I think they were all verbs. So like decode to speak. Okay, well then we're getting these words like a dictator. Why do you think that it's coming from this Latin root to speak? What does a dictator do? Or maybe how would they lead, or when they're up and they're speaking in front of people? And so you're able to make these connections, or the students will be raising their hands in science saying, Mrs. Saxon, is that coming from this Latin word? And they're making the connections.
Yes.
And it's just such a cool thing to see it go completely full circle.
Yeah, the language is not arbitrary. Learning is not arbitrary. Reality is not arbitrary. Things are actually ordered.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what classical education is, and I think that's why Latin is so valuable to it, is is articulating the order of the world to students.
It only took you 2 years to get to third form. You're so impressive, honey.
Wow.
Oh, come
Man,
on.
what is going on here? You are full of it today.
So the other thing that
Are
I
you
think,
just like, are you in trouble at home or something?
no,
No, that's not how we
I
work.
love my wife.
That's
You
not
guys
how you work.
Invited her
No.
here. Sorry. So the other thing that can be a challenge to classical educators is that there's so many references. Like I'm reading City of God right now, as I've mentioned to you, and he just off the cuff mentions Horatius, and I think I talked about this last week. Horatius, Regulus, Scipio, Cicero, and it doesn't explain the whole story. It just says, "Oh, it's like Horatius," and and you're expected to know that. For a classical educator, especially stepping into sixth grade or seventh grade or eighth grade, there's all these Greek mythological figures. They have Roman names too. How did you all kind of overcome that obstacle of you just mentioned the benefit of the interconnectedness of the curriculum. How did you overcome the challenge of the interconnectedness of the curriculum?
I think the first thing is to actually read Greek myths. I mean, that really is. Those are the main big illusions that we don't know. And so even, D'Aulaire's Greek myths will give an adult a great foundation in mythology. And then that prepares the students to read the Trojan War in the sixth grade, and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and Augustine finally. But Cheryl just made me just study things I wasn't teaching. But like the first year I taught the Middle Ages, I spent every weekend. I bought every remaindered book I could find on the Middle Ages at our local bookstore, Holly Cook, at the time. And when I was teaching the lesson on Charlemagne, I would look in the index of every one of those books and read everything I could read about Charlemagne, and then teach the lesson, which was just 2 or 3 pages on Charlemagne. But I felt like I needed to know more. And you don't have to, but it does help if you have to become a student yourself.
Amen.
Wasn't
looked at me like I'm supposed to say something.
Well, it wasn't a challenge for you, I guess. You had all this down.
Yeah. I mean, well,
We're
I think
still
naturally-
doing. He's reading Durant. I mean, we're still
absolutely.
we're still working. And who's the other guy you're reading?
Durant and
Yes,
He
there
doesn't
was.
remember any of the people he's reading.
Do you remember because I asked, it was the person that wrote before Durant, and so Durant started later.
Theodore Mommsen, History of
yes.
Rome. Yeah,
I couldn't remember that.
I'm still working on. I'm on part 2.
Right, but I mean, my point is, we are still educating ourselves.
Oh yeah, and I mean, when you read things, you're not only expanding what you know, you're expanding the circumference of what you know, and so you realize there's, as you know more, that there's actually more to know than you thought there was, and it just keeps expanding.
That's right. You feel really, really smart at the beginning, like, oh yeah, I've got this famous men lesson down, and then the more you read, the less you know.
Well, Cheryl used to talk about ignorance awareness. That was part of learning is ignorance awareness. That which is a very Socratic notion. that you just realize as you go along, as you know more, that how little
you really do
know, and that never stops. And so, but if you're, for me, that's encouraging, because it's like, gosh, there's so much to know out here. The only thing, you get my age and you start thinking, gosh, how much longer do I have that I'm even going to be sentient, that I'll be able to learn more. But you think
you've got a couple of years?
You think I've got a couple of years? Thank you. You're so encouraging. Yeah. No, but you do, when you're learning is, I hate to say this because it sounds so trite. It's used all the time in education circles. Learning is fun. I mean, it's
learning is not fun.
It's work, but work is
learning is joyful.
Rewarding. Learning is joyful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
rewarding, satisfactory.
Satisfactory. It's, I think for a lot of educators, it's just, it's like a shark needs to swim in order to live at all. If it stops, it's you just you're always wanting to move forward in your understanding of things.
And just think, when you're no longer sentient, we can just hand you the same book over and over and over, and you won't know, but you'll still have the same sense of satisfaction and reward.
Right. Yes. And with good authors, it's true anyway, no matter how old you are.
That's right. So we'll just hand you the same book, wonder what it'll be.
Well, I think this has been a good conversation, mainly because
this is him saying we better shut this down now.
Well, yeah, no, I haven't been attacked. I haven't yet too much. So maybe we're doing well. Maybe we should close it up.
Do you think we should attack him? No, we wouldn't attack you. We love you.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. But I don't understand.
I'm not smart.
They both said they love me.
Don't look at me.
I don't really still understand why you wouldn't let Emily on the show before now.
That is not true.
It is 100%.
I do have a Latin anecdote that involves Shane. It could be considered a bit of a roast, I suppose.
Let's do it.
Shane is a great linguist.
Yes, he is.
He has a great handle on the ancient
Several
biblical languages. Yes. And when I started learning Latin, I thought, yes, he doesn't know Latin. I know something that Shane doesn't know. Yeah. So I'm going all in. I would come home with, Shane, did you know the vocative case? And I would just have something that I thought was so great. And Shane would just look at me and go, yeah, it's the same way in Greek. A deadpan. And I'm like, okay, I would try something else the next day. And he would just be like, yeah, I get that. Or I would have a question and he would answer. I'd be like saying my question aloud just to myself. I wonder why it does that. And Shane would just be like, oh, here's why. That's how language works. I was so devastated that I was not the smartest one in the room.
Right. I'm thinking that would be true in probably a lot of areas in your life when you got somebody.
It really is.
Kind of academic.
I don't know. She sounds smarter than Shane, really, to me.
She probably is.
Yeah.
She is.
And maybe in something.
He's just working really hard.
That's right.
Yeah,
overcompensate. Yes.
Well, this has been a really fun episode of the Saxons and Martin and Tanya.
You haven't told us how you're going to educate Jack.
Oh, he's going to be classically educated. I mean, he already is. He's already learning Greek and Hebrew.
He does have no, he doesn't. He's got a Latin book.
He does have a Latin book.
We read the Odyssey very often, the classic lit board book.
Because there's this page on the Odyssey where they go to the Lotus Eaters and they have little dialogue bubbles, and one of them is like num 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 because he's like just eating.
They're eating,
and he loves that page. So he's already deeply in love with the Odyssey. So.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
On that note, it's been a great episode. Thank you. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Classical Etc. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking this video. If you want to join the conversation, then you can comment below, and if you want to stay connected, please subscribe to our channel. I hope you enjoyed this show, and we'll see you next time.